Johannes will now speak on civic nomination. Could I just say that there have been a number of mobile phones that have gone off. That should not happen. Let's take 1 second to turn off or put our mobile phones on silent mode now.
Thank you, Samuel. One of the bone of contentions in the current debate is civic nomination, as the protesters insist on civic nomination as part of their platform. So what I'm trying to do is to look at whether there is a legal basis for doing so, and in so doing, hopefully that would also unveil any rooms for further discussions to bring the two parties together. Albert has already set the scene. Article 45 is familiar to most of the people in Hong Kong now. And Article 35 refers to quite a number of aspects there. There is the selection of the chief executive by universal suffrage, and then there's a nomination by a broadly representative nomination committee and democratic procedure. And under this article, the question asked is there room for civic nomination? The first part, which we have discussed quite a bit already in Hong Kong, is a broadly representative nomination committee, and the NPC Standing Committee decision is that it has to model after the 2012 election committee. And the 2012 election committee has 1,200 members coming from 4 sectors. And these 4 sectors are further subdivided, apart from the 4th sectors, who are the former political figures and current political figures. There are 96 people from these sectors who are ex-officio. And if you exclude that 96 members, and there are another 60 members to be nominated by the religious sectors, basically we have 1,000 odd members, around 1,000 members from these 1,200 members who are to be returned by 38, from 38 subsectors there. And if we pause here, a quick glance at these 38 subsectors, one may not be entirely happy with them, but then one cannot say that the sector on the face of it are not representative. Whether they're sufficiently broad is another thing, but at least the sector itself seems to cover quite a wide range of people. The difficulty is who are the people who make up of the voters in these subsectors, and here lies the difficulties. And when people say that this election or nomination committee is not sufficiently representative, one really needs to go to the details there. And look at the fishing, agriculture and fishery, leaving aside that no matter in what way we look at it, why would it represent 60 members or return 60 members when even the financial sectors return only 18 members. But leaving that aside, look at some of the voters, there are altogether 80 voters in these subsectors, and it includes like Aberdeen Fishermen Friendship Association and Aberdeen Fisherwomen Association. Every respect for them, I'm not aware that the fishermen are the model who advocate gender equality. And then you have Hong Kong and Kowloon Fishermen Association and Hong Kong Fishermen Association, New Territories North District Fishermen's Association, Sai Kung Fishermen Association Limited. Now, just use your imagination and you can reproduce as many as you like. And for some of the sectors, they can subdivide into really very small subsectors there. And another example, the transport again, there are only 226, and by the way, both fishermen, agriculture and transport have only natural voters or corporate voters. There's no natural person at all. And out of these 226 corporate voters in the transport sectors, now you have Association of New Territories Radio Taxi Cabs Limited. Reverse the order, it becomes New Territory Taxi Radio Association. And then you have the Fraternity Association of New Territory Taxi Merchants and the Fraternity Taxi Owners Association. Hong Kong and Kowloon Taxi Company Association and Kowloon Taxi Owner Association and Taxi Association Federations. Now, just imagine how many permutations you can come across. And as if this were not enough, let's look at even more closer. Lei Yu Moon Ko Chiu Road Public Light Bus Merchant Association. Why not Pok Fu Lam Bun Ham Road Bus Association? run a KK Leung Jian Yutong Buildings shuttle bus association. And it is not just the people in that profession. It is interesting, and it might provide us with some clue as well. In this subsector, there's a Maritime Affairs Research Association. Apart from the word maritime, which has something to do with transport, is there anything else that has to do with transport? And then there's an organization of Hong Kong drivers. Presumably, most people here with a driving license are eligible to join. It may be more restrictive than that. And there's a Merchant Navy Officer Guild, Hong Kong. I'm absolutely at a loss what this is. And interesting, there's a taxi and public light bus concern group. There's no shortage of concern group in Hong Kong that you can put in. But on the one hand, and one can imagine also, looking behind the corporate veil, how many overlapping members there may be in these associations. But then the problem of these is that the process and the criteria are absolutely unclear. How to get on with this onto this list? The list itself is published in the ordinance, but who decides who should get onto this list? What are the process? What are the criteria? And the selection process is governed by Hong Kong law, by the Hong Kong government, which in a way also provides the room, therefore, to move forward if one wants to make these subsectors more representative. It is a matter of Hong Kong law. The Hong Kong governments could, in a way, expand the list, make it more inclusive, make it more transparent, and expand the representativeness of the nomination committees. And when the Hong Kong governments early on suggest that they are prepared to make maximum effort to expand the representativeness of the nomination committee, would this be one area that at least they can make some concrete improvements on the representation of these elections committees? Back to that then, back to the Article 45. If the nomination committee itself is not broadly representative, then what? And is it an exclusive? And this is the argument that if it is not broadly representative, then at least we can make the procedure more open. And the argument against that is, well, Article 45 refers to nomination committee, and that is exclusive. You can only have nomination by the nomination committee and nothing else. As a matter of literal interpretation, this is a respectable argument. But then if we look at the earlier part as well, this same article also refers to selection by universal franchise. And what does universal franchise means? A very narrow reading could mean that it means the actual casting of vote. So if every voter in Hong Kong can cast a vote, that is election or selection by universal franchise. A more sensible or more liberal reading would refer to the entire process of elections. So from the very nomination up to the casting of vote, that is what is meant by selection by universal franchise. Then we can look at the whole process to consider whether that falls within the meaning of universal franchise. And of course, one can be aided by other articles in the Basic Law, and it is a general principle when you interpret the Basic Law, you look at the Basic Law as a whole. And Article 26 there refers to the right to stand for election. There's an incorporation of Article 25 of the ICCPR. And the Human Rights Committee under the ICCPR make very specific comments on the meaning of the right to stand for election. And paragraph 15 of the general comment say that any restriction on the right to stand for elections must be justifiable on objective and reasonable criteria. And persons who are otherwise eligible to stand for election should not be excluded by unreasonable or discriminatory requirements, such as by reason of political affiliation. And then paragraph 17 said that if a candidate is required to have a minimum number of supporters for nomination, this requirement should be reasonable and not act as a barrier to candidacy, and political opinions may not be used as a ground to deprive anyone of the right to stand for elections. So if one takes all these together, even if the nomination committee is not broadly representative, sufficiently representative, nonetheless the procedure may come in to counterbalance it. And when we look at the procedure, basically the requirement, and it's not something very difficult to understand, the nomination process itself should not be subject to any unreasonable restrictions. But even that, putting that case to the highest, it simply means the nomination process should not be subject to unreasonable restrictions. That there is still a few steps before you can lead to, therefore, there must be civic nomination. And civic nomination, in a way, could be a means rather than an end. It may be one means to ensure that there is no unreasonable restriction, but it is not the only exclusive means, and it is not easy to infer that directly from Article 45. There are quite a number of proposals that have been put forward during the consultation process, which suggest that there may be other models that could achieve the requirement of no unreasonable restrictions, but nonetheless fall short of having civic nomination. It seems that this is necessary, or this may be the time that we revisit those models. And there's also the 50% threshold. We have seen that a high threshold could also amount to unreasonable restrictions. So in a way, it comes back to the basic when we impose, or when we put forward, or the processes put forward the requirement of civic nomination as if it were a principle. It seems to me that from the very beginning it is a means rather than an end, but then somehow in the process it has been elevated into a principle. And at this point of time, could we be more flexible, take a back seat and look at the whole things again? Should go back to the basic, and the basic is there's no unreasonable restrictions, and be more flexible with civic nomination. And the way forward, and it comes to the end, if there are if a table is to be made up of two planks, and if two planks cannot fit with one another, the artist's job is to cut a bit from each of the planks and try to fit them together. And that seems to be the way forward. And for the protester, if after the analysis we have to go back to the basic about no unreasonable restrictions, could they be more flexible on civic nomination? Not necessarily have to give it up, but at least this is not something that you put at the forefront, and let's go back to the principle and see whether we can explore other alternatives before you come back to this as your last resort. And the Hong Kong government, of course, there are rooms for the Hong Kong governments to put forward more concrete and more specific proposal to expand the representativeness. Even within the current framework of the NPC decision, there are still rooms for the Hong Kong governments to take more initiative and be more specific at this point. As far as the central government is concerned, the threshold 50% is unmovable. I think there could still be room to manipulate or change it as a technical amendment. And I think to move forward, the way to do it is we have to have more constructive and creative thinking, and perhaps less finger pointing. And with that, I hope that may pave a way forward. Thank you.